Call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Bracken?
Here.
Commissioner Port?
Here.
Commissioner Galka? He has signed in, so he's here. Commissioner Prenovo?
Here.
Commissioner McLean?
Here.
Vice Chair Robertson?
Here.
And Chairman Salvage?
Here.
Great, thank you. So this is part two of our public hearings that we began last Wednesday night. And we're going to skip the flag salute as we did last week and move right into our public hearings. I want to summarize the process that we are going to be using this evening. Prior to the initiation of public hearings, I will be doing the summarization of the process. Tonight's the continuation, as I said. At the June 17th, 2020 meeting, the commissioners identified there was no known conflicts of interest of bias. Staff presented the application report. The applicant presented initial comments, and the commission asked questions of staff and the applicant. At the conclusion of the question and answer period, the Planning Commission unanimously voted to continue the public hearing to allow for public comment to be received until 5 p.m. on June 24th, 2020. During the public comment period, staff received several public comments. These comments were provided to the Planning Commission, the applicants, and posted on the city's website and Facebook page for the public to review as well. This evening's procedures will be the continuation of the public hearing. Staff will summarize the content and main points of each public comment. The applicant will then be able to respond to the comments and provide any further statements on the project. The Planning Commission will ask any further questions of the applicant and staff. Once all questions have been asked, the public hearing portion will be closed, and the commission will discuss the merits of the project and ask any final questions of staff. Upon completion of the Planning Commission discussion, a motion for the decision on the application will be heard. Is there any questions on the process for this evening? If not, then let's reopen the public hearing planning file AR-20-05. And Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So good evening, commissioners. Let me scoot forward a little bit on the presentation here. Before you tonight is the continued hearing for consideration of the administrative review of the 24-unit apartment complex on Weldwood. As a quick reminder, the subject property is located at the current end of Weldwood Drive. As part of the development, Weldwood Drive would be extended through the project area, but would not connect to the private Weldwood Drive or any other street other than Weldwood that would go out towards Highway 20. The project would consist of construction of one 3-story building located approximately 220 feet away from the residential properties on Lebanon Drive. And the development has proposed to either meet or exceed all of the development standards, including setbacks, open space, and parking with the automatic earned parking reduction within the development code. So again, in terms of public comment, the Planning Commission agenda with the staff reports and the development plans were posted to the city's website for review on Tuesday, June 9th, which was 8 days prior to the June 17th meeting date, which meets the state's requirements for publication. And the hearing was opened on June 17th, with the comment period for the Planning Commission agenda being closed on Monday, June 22nd at 5 p.m. Prior to and through that comment period, we did receive a number of comments. As was already identified, those comments were posted on the city's website and provided to all required parties, including the Planning Commission, applicants, and the public. All parties have had the opportunity to fully read through each of those comments. And as the letters are included as part of the record in full, this evening I will only be summarizing the main points of each of the received correspondences as it only relates to the decision criteria as identified in the development code. So now we'll go through each of the items received. The first letter was from the Harrisons, and it was actually received prior to the initial meeting of June 17th. The letter identified concerns regarding access and safety on Weldwood Drive and intersecting streets, and indicates that adding additional housing and increased number of vehicles to the area, with Weldwood being the only access point, would create safety issues. In addition, it's indicated that a single access point is insufficient for the development, but it is stated that access should not be granted off of Lebanon Drive or Oak Lane, and requests that there be a barrier such as a fence be installed to reduce pedestrian cross traffic. The letter includes concern over parking and requests that the Planning Commission not support the variance that was originally proposed, but again, this letter was submitted prior to the plan modification and the elimination of the variance application. And finally, the letter indicates concern about cross traffic with opening up Weldwood Drive into the Main Street area. And again, as clarified, there is no proposed connection to Main Street or punching through of Weldwood Drive to that area. It would be a dead-end street. So moving on to the next letter, this was put together by residents of Oak Loop, Wagon Wheel, and Lebanon Drive. It was signed on by a total of 11 different households in that neighborhood. The first item of concern is the increased traffic development of the development would cause an impact to the pedestrian and bicycle safety on Lebanon Drive and Wagon Wheel area, and specifically requests that the traffic impact analysis investigate specific impacts to this area. In addition, they're requesting that there be additional mitigation provided for those areas, included added speed bumps and speed limit signs on Wagon Wheel, adding sidewalks, and as well as a signal at Weldwood Drive and Cascade Drive. There is concern over the increased population with a high-density project next to a single-family neighborhood, and a 3-story building is too tall for that neighborhood, and they are requesting that the developer construct a 2-story structure, or more preferably, an expansion of a commercial development that would provide a benefit to the community as a whole. The letter further requests that the Planning Commission not allow the earned parking reduction, but maintain the full parking requirements. And there's also concern over the increased demands on the school system that were noted in the letter. There is also reference to wetlands to the south of the property, as well as the residential properties to the south being on the well system. And there's stated concerns that if the development were to be built, it would remove a significant amount of groundwater intrusion, and it would create an impact to the wells and the wetlands, and they would want to have that analyzed further before the development were to occur. However, if the development were to be approved, the residents are requesting a 10 to 20 foot wall along with perimeter of trees to be installed between the development and the neighborhood to the south to mitigate noise and pedestrian traffic. And finally, they're requesting further communication with the developer about the full scope of the development proposal and to discuss the full impact to the community beyond just this first phase that's currently under consideration. In addition, they provided a community survey that was conducted in September of 2019, and that was included for the commission to help understand the opinions of the neighborhood to the south regarding their overall opinions on development in their area. Next up is the letter from Ms. Stutzman. She indicated she understands that there is a need to develop affordable housing, but she is concerned over the choice of location and suggests an alternative site location would be more appropriate. In addition, she has stated concerns over the schools becoming overcrowded. And finally, she does suggest that if the property were to be developed, there be a fence to be included along the property line to stop pedestrian cross traffic that occurs from the Walmart property into the south neighborhood. Next up is a letter from Alicia Vandriel. She indicates concern over traffic especially if it's connected to South Main Street. But again, the street extension would not connect to that area. It would be a dead end. There's also stated concerns on traffic on Weldwood and near Highway 20, and it suggests that an additional traffic signal may be needed to address those traffic concerns. There's also a request for a specified community liaison to be assigned to address any of the resident concerns and help communication between the neighborhood residents and the property owners of the new development. There's also a request for either a berm or a wall to be constructed to address noise and pedestrian foot traffic. That would be along the southern property line again, to cut off the Walmart shopping center foot traffic through the property. Ms. Van Drill has also requested clarification on if there would be any impact on the taxes and their taxes associated with the increased development. And finally, identifies concerns regarding flooding in the area due to lack of drainage and how the property would be impacted with this issue. And moving on to the next letter. Ms. Figueroa's letter identifies concern over decrease in property values associated with a high density development next to a single family neighborhood. In addition, she indicates that there will be a decrease in the quality of life in the neighborhood due to the removal of trees from the property, which would provide a great loss of privacy with the tall structure and windows facing the properties to the south. There would also be increase in traffic and spilled lighting and noise that would be of concern for her. And Ms. Figueroa agrees that there is a need for housing, but she strongly opposes this location for the housing to be provided. Mr. Post discusses pedestrian cross-traffic issues in the neighborhood from the Walmart shopping center and simply requests that this issue be addressed by providing a 6-foot-tall site-obscuring fence along the southern and eastern property lines to address these issues. Next up, Mr. Sutton indicates an opposition to the project. As an individual in the construction industry, he's concerned regarding the long-term maintenance of the property. In addition, he would like to ensure that there's a barrier along the perimeter of the property and is concerned over the amount of parking provided on site. And he would like to ensure that there's an appropriate on-site maintenance and management associated with the development to address any concerns. Next up is a letter from Ron and Ryan Edwards. This letter identifies some areas within the staff report that are indicated as incorrect. And so as we move forward, I will be providing clarification through this letter to clarify the position of the city staff in the staff report.
Yeah.
So the first item is identified that the staff report incorrectly identifies the property size. For clarification, the development site,
Still here?
the development,
Yes.
sorry, if we could mute everybody, there we go. So for clarification, the development site is 1.53 acres. And the setback and density standards were applied using this smaller acreage area. However, the property is currently over 9 acres in size, but the city is in the process of reviewing the application for a minor land partition to separate out the development area from the overall site, and this was also included as a condition of development. The differentiation does not have any impact on the development review, as the smaller property size is more restrictive, and the property would meet the development standards whether the property was partitioned or not. Next, the letter indicates the surrounding uses was incorrectly identified and indicates that to the south, the property is not vacant, but it does contain a single family home. That is absolutely correct. It was a misstatement in the staff reports that the site was vacant. But that was just an overview of the surrounding areas, and we understand that to the south is a single family neighborhood. The letter further states that they believe the development is considered high density and should therefore be processed using a high density development standard rather than the mixed density standard, and that the high density designation would impact the development standards as well as the system development charges. For clarification, in the staff report, under the mixed use designation, if the project is residential in nature, the development code indicates that it must use the mixed density residential standards as the applicable development standards for consideration. Further, the mixed density and the high density residential standards are identical in terms of setback, parking, open space, and height limitations. And therefore, even though even with the application of the high density standards, the development would still comply with the code. And finally, the zoning designation modification from a mixed density to a high density standard, it would not impact the system development charges as they're calculated. They're not calculated based off of zoning designation, but the type of construction and vehicle trips per day and those types of calculations. Next up, the letter indicates that the project and the city has not complied with NPDES permit requirements for the construction phase, or that a 1200C or the 1200C permit to address stormwater, wetlands, and soils. For clarification, this application is the initial review stages for determination if the project should move forward or not, and it is not under the construction phase yet. So if the Planning Commission were to approve the development proposal, the applicant would then be responsible for obtaining the necessary permits to comply with the NPDES standards for stormwater mitigation, wetlands, and soils, and it would occur at that point in time, but is not subject to the requirements for review under this application. The letter continues indicating that the city did not provide calculations with the plans to demonstrate that there's sufficient utility capacity for water, sewer, and stormwater. Again, in response, the city, through the review phase, determined that the project was compliant with all of the zoning classification and compliant with all aspects of the development code. And as such, since there's been no modifications or variances, the development build out is anticipated within the city's existing facility plans, and there's no further calculations that are required to make a determination of whether or not this facility can be serviced or not. Next up, the letter identifies that the project is near historical sites, specifically the Wagon Trail Road, and an archaeological study should be completed and incorporated in the analysis for the project. In response, the archaeological review is not required for the completion of the land use consideration that would occur after the fact and prior to construction, but it would be required. And as such, the applicant has already, through their funding requirements, obtained the archaeological review, and I'm sure they'll discuss that in their responses. Next, the letter indicates that the project materials were not accessible until June 17th, at which time the city provided the staff report and the developer information, so they were concerned about transparency. But again, for clarification, the public notice for the application was issued on May 28th. In the public notice, it identified opportunities to be able to review the materials within City Hall. The agenda reports were also posted to the city's website on June 9th, which was 8 days prior to the hearing. So the staff report and the materials were all available at least a week before the first hearing. Next, the letter indicates that the project is incompatible with standing agreements and references the city and county's urban growth management agreement, and indicates that per the agreement, the city is responsible to coordinate with the county on a project. Since the city did not coordinate with the county on the project, that the project should be delayed until such time as that coordination occurs. Unfortunately, this is a misinterpretation of the urban growth agreement between the city and the county. The agreement is for the development of land within the county, but within the city's urban growth boundary. So if there was a development application within the county and within the UGB, per the agreement, the county has the responsibility to make contact with the city and coordinate with the city to make sure that it's consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and growth patterns. And it's not the other way around. All of that being said, though, the county is included in the public notice distribution process. So the county was provided the information about the potential application the 20 days prior to the initial hearing as well. And if they had any comments or questions, they had the opportunity to provide comments. And then finally, the letter refers to impacts to schools and that the city must, per the comprehensive plan, provide notification to the Lebanon School District when a major development is proposed that may impact that school district. And again, the city did notify the school district through the required notification process of the pending hearing, and they were provided the opportunity to comment, and therefore that provision has been met. So, moving to the next comment letter, if we can. Come on, there we go. Next is a letter from Mr. Fryer. His letter indicated support of the project and indicated the support was based off of the significant need for more affordable housing within Lebanon. And the final comment letter received was from the city of Woodburn. This letter provided a background of over 30 years experience with the city of Woodburn that they have with the actual applicant for a project that they manage. The letter identifies the resources and support provided by the applicant to the residents, helps to create a sense of community and upward growth of those residents. And in addition, the city indicated that their residents had very similar concerns to those that we are currently experiencing. However, to date, over those 30 years, those concerns have never materialized, and they hope that that provides some guidance to the commission regarding those concerns. And so with that, the public comments have concluded. And so I will stop sharing my screen. Maybe. After the close of the comment period, but before this evening, we did receive a phone call of a resident requesting that the commission provide a 1-week extension on the public comment period for further review. And so to discuss this request and the requirements of the city, I will turn it over to the city attorney to discuss it further.
So in response to the oral request that Kelly received, I've taken a look at the executive order issued by the governor with respect to public hearings, and I've also taken a look at the DLCD guidelines. And what they basically say is that we still have to follow all the regular procedures, but we can just do it through some process of the video testimony or video hearings and that kind of stuff, which we're doing and which we're complying with. But there's also provision in the ORS regarding the quasi-judicial procedures that says, and I'm going to quote it just because it's very specific, says, prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony. And here it does not give the commission any discretion. It says the local hearing authority shall grant such request by continuing the public hearing. So Kelly and I kind of walked through what is the initial evidentiary hearing in this context. Certainly it wasn't written, the statute wasn't written with the expectation that the hearings would be bifurcated in the way that we're doing. That being said, in kind of looking at where is the end of the initial evidentiary hearing, because we were taking evidence basically up to and somewhat including tonight's hearing, although bifurcated over days, that the request was made within before the initial evidentiary hearing had closed or had been concluded. So I think out of an abundance of caution, that even though it was an oral request and there's some question as to whether the request for evidence even relates to the parameters that we're limited to as far as the points that are relevant to this hearing, I think out of an abundance of caution with the potential for an appeal to LUBA, that we need to make sure that we honor that request. Which would also include, which would mean we leave the record open for additional evidence. That doesn't mean we have to have another hearing, but that we leave the record open for any additional evidence for 7 days, but then also provide an additional 7 days for the applicant to respond to any new evidence or additional evidence that's submitted during that 7-day period. This would not be a time to raise any new issues other than what this applicant or what this party wants to respond to the application itself. So that's my recommendation. Now, I've also told Kelly that given the parameters that we are under with respect to these different procedures, that there's certainly an argument that would be made and an argument that could be made that by changing the procedures accordingly, the evidentiary hearing as we're setting as we're doing, we could defend it by making a decision tonight. But I certainly can't make any guarantees as to how LUBA would respond to that. So with that, that's my recommendation. Ultimately, it's the decision of the commission.
Okay, thank you, Trey. Does the applicant have the opportunity to rebut tonight, or is that delayed?
No, the applicant can address all of the issues that have already been raised. And then their 7-day rebuttal would be to only evidence that is submitted during that additional 7-day window after that. And it would all be by written testimony. We don't, that can be submitted to the to this body. And at the next hearing that we would set after that 14-day period, the record would have been closed at that point, and the commission would simply have to make a decision.
Okay. So then at this time, I would invite the applicant to step up if they so choose and provide some rebuttal.
So this is Mark Rossi with Pinnacle Architecture. Some of the items that were brought up about the site obscuring fence and landscaping along the southern border, that is already part of the documents that we are going to submit for building permits. So we're proposing a 6-foot site obscuring fence along the south and what would be the east corners of our property. And then plus that whole southern end is, per landscape plan, has, what are they, honey locust trees? And there's quite a few of them. So it's every 30 feet or so along that property line, there's trees abutting that particular area. Now, as far as the drainage concerns, Jim, do you want to speak on that?
I guess I would just say that our design is above city standard to contain and infiltrate the 25-year storm event. And we've taken that into consideration. So we don't have any drainage concerns on our end.
And I guess one other point where somebody's talking about the wetlands, that's further north, way up there. And I sent Kelly a little diagram. I don't know if she can pull it out, but that's completely not even on this particular property. And with the original funding packet, we did, and I can let Claudia explain this a little more, but we had to do a phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental assessment, which include the not historical, whatever you call that.
The state historic, right. SHPO.
Yep.
The archaeological survey.
And archaeological survey too.
Yeah,
so
and
we've already had to do that.
Right, and I think I just wanted to add to what Mark was saying, that, you know, as part of our 2 major funding sources, which is Oregon Housing and Community Services and the USDA Rural Development, there's a number of things that we had to do. And just so the commissioners have an idea of what all has been done, we've done a wetland study, a phase 1, a phase 2, a geotech, Alta survey, traffic study, archaeological, SHPO. Everyone has been notified. All of these things need to be done before we can even entertain looking at a site, because our funders need to be assured that before they spend money, that this property is in good condition. The other thing I wanted to take this opportunity to address, that in some of the comments there was discussion about, you know, is there going to be maintenance, landscaper? You know, yes, the property will have an on-site manager that will be living on site. There will be maintenance personnel that will also be taking care of the grounds. And on top of that, we will be hiring out a landscaping company, which, you know, our organization usually would like to hire local companies. But this landscaping company will come in and once a week make sure that our landscaping is maintained appropriately.
Okay. Any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant?
Yes.
ahead.
Regarding the fence or barrier, what were you proposing to put along the back of there?
We haven't
What kind
actually,
of fence?
sorry, we haven't actually chosen a fence, but at first glance, I mean, site obscuring fences could be anything from chain link fence with vinyl slats to a wood fence. Right now, we're still looking through the costing of that and trying to figure out which one we want to use because of costing. But we haven't really picked it yet. We just know we want a 6-foot site obscuring fence along that boundary.
Well, with my experience, a chain link fence would probably last longer. A wooden fence, after about 5 or 6 years, would start sagging. Yeah, you know, I think it's ridiculous to request a 20-foot concrete barrier fence, but I think that you know, a cyclone fence with slats sounds like a reasonable type barrier.
Thank you, Dave. One question I might have, one or two of the letters asked the question or alluded to the question of why you chose to get an approval on one piece of the entire development. Would you comment on that, please?
Yes, I can go ahead and comment. So the reason we did that is because when the funding sources, it depends on the funding sources that are made available during that time. And we weren't able to make it wasn't feasible for us to make all of the units all at once. So the funding source that we applied for first was the USDA Rural Development. And we combined that with Oregon Housing and Community Services home and gap money. So we ended up doing that phase 1 first. And the second phase, we're waiting for the second application, which will hopefully come up in July. Whether the awards will be made in July.
Okay, thank you. And then at that point, you'll determine whether you want to go forward with phase 2.
No, at that point, once we hear back from Oregon Housing and Community Services in July, whether or not we got the LIFT funds, then we'll go ahead and go through the same process of going for permits and begin working towards construction.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for the applicant?
So
Seeing none, then
I got a quick one.
go ahead, Samuel.
Hey, Don. So LIFT funds, I think it's a local innovation fast track, right? So LIFT funds have certain requirements that you have to do. And hopefully you're meeting all those requirements. But one of the comments was, is there going to be a liaison between the complex and also the residents outside the complex to either deal with safety or traffic, or someone they can go and talk to and say, hey, there's a problem. So one of the comments in one of the letters was that. Has that been addressed? Is that going to be addressed in your resident services, that you do have someone maybe outside the apartment manager to address concerns of the outside citizens in the neighborhood?
Yeah, so we're going to be working, FHDC will be working closely with our property management, which is Evolve Property Management. And we have 2 resident services coordinators that all they do is their task to be working at, in this case, it would be this phase 1. And so their task to get to know the residents, get to know the neighbors, get to know the whole neighborhood in general, because if there's questions that come up from the residents, that there's certain needs that they may have, or one of the neighbors comes and says, hey, you know, this is happening, there has to be that point person. In this case, it would be that resident services coordinator who would be working closely with the on-site manager to solve that whatever issue there is. So that's the resident services coordinator will be that community liaison person who would be it.
Okay,
Did I
is there
answer
any
your
other-
question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so what we have before us then is a request for a continuance. Our city attorney has advised us that we should honor that request. So now the discussion amongst the commissioners is that your preference. And I think if we do that, talking earlier with Kelly, the continuance or the next hearing, I should say, is not available until July 15th. That would be our regular July hearing date. I think I heard Trey say that the written testimony portion would remain open until July 2nd at 5 p.m. So that would be the parameters that we're working with.
Well, I think it's more specific than that. We would give the 7 days for additional information by those that have, I guess it would be by anybody, but for those in opposition. But then that would then close, and then for additional 7 days, it would only be for any rebuttal by the applicant in written form in response to only those issues that are raised by any submission during the 7 days extension.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Could you give us a specific date on when that rebuttal would close? Are we talking 7 days from the 22nd?
So if, Trey, I can try to help out here a little bit. So as of today, we would start counting tomorrow as day one. So for the public to provide further comment, it would close at 5 p.m. on July 2nd, which is 7 days past today. And then the comments would be distributed to the applicant at that point in time, and the applicant would be able to respond and rebut to those comments in writing as of, and we'll receive it by 5 p.m. on July 9th. And then we would resume the hearing on July 15th at the regular Planning Commission meeting at 6 p.m. And the Planning Commission would then observe any further comment received from those written or oral comments provided from the public, and then the applicant's rebuttal. There wouldn't be any further testimony provided at that date of the 15th. It would just be reviewing those further comments and then decision and discussion. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments from commissioners? I guess what we're looking for, commissioners, is are we willing to approve that request, or is there a reason to deny that request?
I like what Trey said, or what he said was wait the 7 days and err on the side of caution, or whatever that time frame was. He said is, I'm okay with that. I mean, we have a meeting in July, right? So let's just err on the side of caution would be give them the time to submit more comments if they need to, give the applicant the time. But I mean, yeah, we could entertain a motion now, or we could err on the side of caution. I have no problem ever erring on the side of caution. We're just holding off until our next meeting.
Do you need a motion to continue?
No.
This, or extension?
No, I don't believe you need a motion. I mean, basically it's I think there would have to be a motion to close the public hearing would be more appropriate if that's where the commission is going. So at this point, I think procedurally, it's just left open for 7 days, as Kelly indicated.
Don, your mic is on.
Anybody opposed to continuing the hearing?
Thank you, Jeremy.
Anybody opposed? Hearing no opposition, then the hearing will be continued under the guidelines it was stated.
So if
And
I
if-
may, just for the public, just to make sure it's fully stated, then we'll make sure to put this on the website as well. We will receive any public written comments or oral comment as identified in the original public notice that was issued until 5 p.m. on Thursday, July 2nd. After 5 p.m. on Thursday, July 2nd, no further public comment will be accepted. And then the applicant will have 7 days to rebut. And so that time period would end on Thursday, July, I had it, July 9th, thank you, at 5 p.m. for all clarification purposes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, then we will close this portion for this evening and move on to our next public hearing. That hearing be planning file AR-20-02. I'm sorry, Kelly.
Nope, that's all. We're good.
Okay. And at this point, then I will turn it over to staff, and we have a letter to review.
Okay. So let me get this going really quick. So good evening again. This is the continued hearing for the administrative review application for a proposed 48-unit apartment complex at the northwest corner of Russell and Franklin. As a quick recap, maybe. The project is 48 units. It includes a 3-story apartment building. There's 3 of them. The entire project meets the requirements for setbacks and open space, and they do provide the minimum parking requirement without using any earned parking reduction. We did receive 1 public comment from Lynn County Road Authority, which discusses the requirements for area dedication of the property, and that dedication has already been incorporated in the plan, and the design has been set back based off of that new dedication line. It also identifies requirements for street improvements and then has further discussion regarding on-site storm drainage design and suggestions. The proposed conditions of development do include the requirement that all of Lynn County Road Authority's conditions be met and addressed. And so this should address all of the public comment side. The letter as a whole from Lynn County Road Authority doesn't count as conditions of the property. They do count as comments. And so the applicant would be required to work with Lynn County Road Authority to identify the final scope of any improvements required as part of their project. And then, of course, they'd work with us to make sure that it's compliant with the city standards as well. That concludes any of the public comments received. And so we can continue on with any further discussion from there.
And I don't think we have the applicant with us. Not sure there's anything there to rebut.
We do have the applicant here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No
Would the applicant like to step up and do any rebuttal?
So this is Matt Johnson with Studio 3 Architecture. No, not necessarily on rebuttal. We're meeting the right-of-way dedication beyond what the county is asking so that we can accommodate the future right-hand turn lane that we discussed last week. So I think we actually meet a lot of the county's requests just through the discussions that we've already had with them and with Kelly and the city of Lebanon.
Thank you. Is there any questions for the applicant? Okay, then with that, we will close the public testimony portion of our hearing. All further discussion will be among staff and planning commissioners. Any concerns or questions about the application? One item that I might bring up, I spoke with Kelly about it earlier, the road improvements on Franklin. Franklin, of course, is a county standard road. Wasn't real clear, and so I reached out to Kelly for clarification. What's being asked of the applicant is essentially a half-street improvement on the Franklin right away. I was confused by that. So I don't know if anybody else was confused by that or not. Did I state that correctly, Kelly?
Yes, and generally speaking, the way that the conditions are all written and required through the city and in consultation with the county, it ultimately ends up being a half-street improvement with the curb, gutter, sidewalk, landscape planters, and street improvements.
So is that, if I remember correctly, that portion of the road in Franklin seems to be narrower. Would that make that wider at that point?
There is a plan to put in a dedicated right turn lane there, so it would widen it, yes.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, is anybody prepared to make a motion?
I can do it.
Okay,
I move that the Planning Commission approve the Administrative Review AR 20-02 based on the written findings in the staff report and direct staff to draft a Planning Commission order to incorporate findings in the conditions of the approval.
I will second
we have
that.
a second. Todd, any further discussion? Based on the motion by Samuel, I would assume that all commissioners feel that the criteria has been met. And if you don't feel so, then please speak up. Hearing nobody, then we have a motion on the table. With those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, please say nay. Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, moving on to our third hearing, annexation, planning file A-20-03. And again, I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, sir. Again, this is a continued hearing for the annexation for the property off of Oak Street. The annexation, again, is just a request to allow for the property to connect to city sewer. And we did not receive any public comment on this application, so I would turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. This one appears to be pretty straightforward. Does anybody have any concerns or comments? Does everybody feel the criteria has been met? Not seeing a lot of movement.
I'm with you, Don. It's a pretty straightforward, common sense request.
Right, thank you, Jeremy.
Even I don't have a question on this one.
That's a good sign. All right, is anybody prepared to make a motion?
I can do it again.
Okay,
I move the Planning Commission recommends approval of the annexation A-20-03 based on the written findings in the staff report and direct staff to draft an order of the recommendation incorporating the findings and conditions of approval.
Second.
is there a second?
Yes, second.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed, please say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to our final public hearing that was continued, planning file A-20-02. And again, I'll turn it back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, sir. Believe it or not, this was the application with the second most public comments that we received. And so I just kind of, before we move on, want to clarify that the annexations proposed are simply for the street segments. It does not include any private property. It does not affect any private property, their zoning, their tax base, who they report to, their utilities. There is a net zero effect on any private property associated with properties adjacent to these street segments. And so I just want to make sure it's very clear the only reason why we're doing these annexations are to sort of clean up the city boundary lines in terms of city limits, and then to allow for the police departments to do appropriate actions in terms of traffic control and ticketing and that kind of thing for the street segments alone. Again, it has zero impact whatsoever on private property in terms of the annexation. And so with that, although we received quite a few questions about the annexation, we didn't receive any formalized comments about them. And so technically there were no public comments received. And so with that, I'll turn it back over.
Right. Again, I think this is pretty straightforward. Kelly gave a good explanation of what we're actually annexing. Any concerns or questions for staff? Okay, is anybody prepared to make a motion?
I can make a motion.
Go ahead.
I recommend the city council approval of the proposed annexation A20-02, adopting the written findings of the decision criteria contained in the staff report.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Jeremy? All right, any further discussion? All those in favor of the application, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. All right, that concludes our public hearings. Kelly, I'm going to pass it back over to you for just a minute, talk about what we've got coming up.
Yeah, okay. So in theory, we will be holding our July 15th Planning Commission meeting in person and at the travel station. Looks like some of us are excited about that. If there are any of you that are concerned about meeting in person, please do reach out to me and we will try to identify some alternative means. We can continue to do a hybrid where some are through Zoom and some are in person. We will be able to provide personal protective equipment if need be to do whatever we need to do, make you feel comfortable. In addition to that, we had a meeting in the travel station this morning and experienced what social distancing looks like, and it's weird to say the least, but we do have some availability for the public to sit in the room with us. I think there was about 8 to 10 chairs that would be available for that using social distancing standards. So we will have at least 4 and now maybe 5 applications with the continuation of the hearing tonight in that meeting. So we'll have to do some interesting maneuvering if we have a lot of public there, but we will work through it. And so just please do contact me if you have any concerns so that we can get moving on that right away. And beyond that, both Ron and I will be out of the office next week. And so if you do have any concerns, please feel free to email me or wait until the week after and we can get to them. So.
Okay, any commissioner comments? Seeing done, I for one am looking forward to be back together in person. This is a little weird, but we got through it. So
you guys did great. I really appreciate it.
If there's no other comments, then we are adjourned, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Aye.
Bye.
Thanks, Don.